Before we start today's story, we would like to request you to help out our friend's new channel Timeless Audio Tales, where he puts together some amazing stories. The link is in the description box, so please visit the channel and hit the subscribe button. Now let's start with today's story. The sharp sound of Thomas's phone sliced through the stillness of his bedroom. His mind wrestled with the depths of slumber as he groped along the nightstand, inadvertently toppling a glass of water before finally grasping the buzzing device. The scream erupted vividly at 2:17 a.m., an indeterminate count. The vacant spot next to him in bed appeared to taunt him. Charlotte was expected home hours ago from her weekly gathering of literary enthusiasts. She departed at 7, adorned in a blouse he had never encountered, a hint of an unknown fragrance lingering behind her. "Don't wait up," she called over her shoulder, the front door shutting with a definitive click. "Greetings?" His voice came out hoarse from slumber, his throat constricted by an unshakable sense of foreboding. "Are you Thomas Crawford?" The male voice on the other end exuded professionalism, its controlled tone laced with an undercurrent of tension that sent Thomas's pulse racing. Articulating, Thomas straightened his posture, the remnants of sleep slipping away like an abandoned shroud. "This is Officer Stephen Parker from the Metropolitan Police Department." The officer hesitated, and Thomas discerned the deliberate choice of words that ensued. "Good day. I am reaching out regarding your spouse, Charlotte Crawford. An incident has occurred." Thomas's fingers clenched the phone more firmly. "What type of event are we discussing? Is she injured?" A troubling situation has emerged as she was discovered at the Pine Grove Motel on Hamilton Street. She has been taken to Memorial Hospital by emergency services. "You ought to come immediately." The Pine Grove Motel. Thomas's thoughts whirled, struggling to grasp the details. That was on the other side of town, far from the location where her book club was said to gather. What was she up to in that place? "I appreciate your inquiries, Mr. Crawford, but I'm unable to share further information via phone. Upon your arrival, the staff in the emergency room will provide you with a briefing." Officer Parker's tone was meticulously even, yet there was an undercurrent that caused Thomas's stomach to tighten. Static crackled at the periphery of the call. Thomas flicked on the bedside lamp. Soft light poured into the master bedroom, their shared sanctuary, as his gaze landed on the framed memories adorning the dresser. Their wedding day 8 years ago. Charlotte glowing in white, a getaway in Hawaii 3 years prior. Both of them sharing laughter on the beach. Recent snapshots revealed subtle changes he attempted to overlook. Charlotte's fresh highlights, the garments crafted by designers. Her smile appeared to be more of a performance than a true expression. "As I slipped into my jeans and sweater, echoes of the past year began to emerge." Charlotte's phone consistently lay face down on tables, the manner in which she turned her laptop screen to the side as he stepped into her home office. The relentless barrage of work emails that inevitably land in your inbox right at dinner time. She was adamant about the yoga studio membership, even though the one nearer to their home had superior reviews. He overlooked every warning sign, placing his full trust in her. What sort of fool was he? The journey to Memorial Hospital felt simultaneously interminable and fleeting. The streets lay almost deserted at this hour, streetlights flickering shadows across his face as he clutched the steering wheel tightly. He hardly registered the yellow light flashing by, his mind entirely occupied by that one word. "In." Thomas drove into the hospital parking lot, the sound of tires crunching over loose gravel accompanying his choice of the first available space. The entrance to the emergency room appeared ahead, its fluorescent light cutting sharply through the dimness of the pre-dawn hour. The sound of his footsteps reverberated through the stillness of the lot as he hurried toward the sliding doors. Within the confines of the reception area, a sharp antiseptic scent overwhelmed his senses, accompanied by the relentless hum of fluorescent lights. Elegance. A nurse glanced up from her station, her name tag revealing her as Grace. Her eyes were gentle, and the lines at their corners deepened as she observed his unease. "How may I assist you?" she inquired, her fingers hovering expectantly above the keyboard. "My beloved partner," Thomas persevered. His voice was rough and raspy. "Charlotte Crawford." They reached out regarding her situation. A glimmer of recognition passed over Nurse Grace's face, quickly replaced by an expression that resembled pity in an unsettling way. "Certainly, Mr. Crawford. Do take a seat." Dr. Wilson will be with you shortly to discuss matters further. I prefer to stand. Thomas started to pace the waiting room, the sound of his shoes squeaking on the newly waxed floor echoing in the silence. The room was almost devoid of life at this time, with only an old man dozing in a corner chair, his chin resting against his chest, and a young mother gently holding her feverish toddler. The minutes dragged on, stretching endlessly like hours. Thomas glanced at his phone over and over, fully aware that it would remain silent, devoid of any messages from Charlotte. She had sent her final message at 6:45 p.m. off to the book club meeting. "Don't stay up for me." The nonchalant trickery of it caused his jaw to tighten. The double doors to the treatment area swung open, revealing a tall figure clad in surgical scrubs. His identification. The badge displayed the name Dr. James Wilson, Chief of Surgery. "Mr. Crawford." "Absolutely. That's who I am." Thomas moved closer, examining the doctor's expression for hints. "How is Charlotte doing? What occurred with her?" Dr. Wilson motioned to a quieter area of the waiting room, distancing themselves from the other patients. His expression was meticulously arranged, exuding professionalism, yet there was a certain awkwardness in his demeanor that made Thomas feel uneasy. "Your spouse is currently undergoing surgery," Dr. Wilson started, maintaining a hushed tone. "We are in the process of facilitating her removal." He hesitated, visibly uneasy. "An external entity that has become trapped within the body. The procedure is intricate, yet she remains stable." "Unfamiliar entity." Thomas felt a parched sensation in his mouth. "Could you clarify what you mean?" Dr. Wilson adjusted his stance, the unease clearly evident at this point. "Regrettably, I am unable to share additional specifics at this moment. What truly matters is that we are tackling the pressing medical issue at hand. Officer Parker wishes to discuss the details surrounding your wife's admission." Just as expected, a police officer made his way toward them. He appeared younger than Thomas had anticipated from their phone conversation, perhaps in his early 30s, sporting a boyish face that contrasted sharply with his serious demeanor. "Mr. Crawford." Officer Parker reached out with his hand. "I would appreciate a moment of your time." Thomas grasped the offered hand with a mechanical motion, observing the officer's strong grip and the positioning of his other hand close to his weapon. A customary position, perhaps, yet it contributed to the dreamlike essence of the experience. "It's important to note a few details regarding the situation at hand." Parker pressed on, guiding Thomas a short distance from Dr. Wilson. "Your spouse was discovered in room 114 at the Pine Grove Motel. Security cameras at the establishment captured another person exiting the room in a rush just moments before the 911 call came in." Thomas experienced a surge of nausea in his throat. One more person, a man, around 6 feet in height, with an athletic physique. The clarity of the footage leaves much to be desired for a definitive identification. Yet we are diligently focused on enhancing it. Parker hesitated, selecting his subsequent words with precision. The room bore unmistakable evidence of closeness and shared moments. The fluorescent lights abruptly felt overwhelmingly bright. The antiseptic odor is overpowering. Thomas propped himself against the wall, his legs trembling beneath him. The previous year of lingering uncertainties and overlooked concerns surged over him like an overwhelming tide. "I want to see her," he said abruptly, pushing away from the wall. "At this moment, she is undergoing surgery, sir." Dr. Wilson began to voice his objections. Yet Thomas was already advancing toward the operating room doors, his feet propelling him forward as if under some irresistible force. "Mr. Crawford, it's not permissible for you to enter that area," Nurse Grace called out to him. But he paid her no mind, pushing through the doors into the surgical wing with urgency. The hallway extended ahead, with doors marked OR1, OR2, OR3. Peering through the narrow window of the third door, he caught sight of a group of medical staff clad in surgical gowns and masks. At the heart of their focus was Charlotte, lying unconscious on the operating table. Without a moment's hesitation, Thomas surged through the door. The sight that met his eyes would remain etched in his mind for all time. Charlotte's pale face, partially obscured by an oxygen mask, her body enveloped in blue surgical sheets, and in the surgeon's hands, the unmistakable silhouette of the object they were intent on removing. A massive presence. Its presence was a chilling affirmation of his deepest anxieties. "Excuse me," But you are not permitted to be in this area." A nurse attempted to obstruct his line of sight, but the moment had already passed. Dr. Catherine, the assisting surgeon, hurried to guide him away. "Mr. Crawford, please," she urged, her tone resolute yet gentle beneath her surgical mask. "It is essential to uphold a sterile environment. The safety of your wife hinges on this matter." Thomas permitted himself to be guided back to the waiting room, his thoughts dulled by shock and disgust. He sank into a chair, the vinyl protesting under his weight, and concealed his face in his hands. The wedding ring on his finger felt like it was burning his skin. As the first light of dawn began to spill over the city, he gazed through the expansive windows of the waiting room, captivated by the emerging day. The night sky transitioned from a rich black to a profound deep blue, with stars gradually disappearing as dawn drew near. Thomas sat rigid in his chair, every muscle tense with anger and betrayal. And in the growing light, his resolve hardened like steel. He would uncover everything, each deception, each falsehood, each instance of betrayal. Excuses would find no sanctuary here, and forgiveness would be a distant notion. With the dawn breaking, Thomas Crawford quietly pledged to himself. She would come to rue the moment she chose to turn against him. The morning sunlight filtered through the hospital window, creating elongated shadows that danced across the clinical space. Thomas perched on a stiff vinyl chair, his gaze fixed on Charlotte's still figure lying on the bed. The steady beeping of monitors created a constant backdrop to his swirling thoughts. The wedding ring rested heavily on his finger, a tangible reminder of 8 years filled with trust and devotion, its weight almost taunting him. The operation concluded 2 hours prior. Dr. Wilson had assured him it was successful, though his carefully neutral tone couldn't hide the awkwardness of the situation. Now Thomas waited, his mind replaying every suspicious moment from the past year through the lens of his new knowledge. A subtle shift in Charlotte's breathing caught his eye. Her eyelids fluttered, fingers twitching against the pristine hospital sheets. Thomas leaned forward, his expression steeled as he braced for the confrontation he had been mentally rehearsing. Charlotte's eyes opened slowly, confusion clouding their blue depths as she took in her surroundings. As soon as she noticed Thomas, a wave of fear swept over her face, swiftly replaced by a deep sense of shame. "Thomas." Her voice was husky, almost a whisper. The oxygen monitor on her finger quivered as she extended her hand toward him. "What is happening? What happened? That's what I'd like to know." Thomas's voice had the power to chill the warm summer breeze wafting through the window. "Why don't you tell me about your evening at book club?" Charlotte's fingers gripped the delicate hospital blanket, her knuckles turning white against the soft, pale fabric. "I really don't." Her brow knitted in concentration. "Everything's fuzzy. Allow me to clarify things for you." Thomas leaned in, his eyes piercing into hers. "Room 114, Pine Grove Motel. Ring any bells?" The color drained from Charlotte's face. A tear slid down her cheek as the memories visibly crashed over her. "Thomas, please, who is he?" The question hung between them like an executioner's blade. The steady beep of the heart monitor increased its pace, betraying Charlotte's rising panic. "His name is Andrew," she finally whispered, each word seeming to physically pain her. Her fingers worried at the edge of the blanket, unable to meet Thomas's gaze. "I met him at Radiance Yoga Studio. Half a year ago." "Half a year." Thomas's voice was eerily silent. "Half a year of deception right before my eyes. Half a year of undermining all that we created together. It was never meant to unfold this way." Charlotte's words spilled forth in a frantic cascade. Her hands danced restlessly, struggling to convey her thoughts. "Initially, we were merely friends. He was my mentor, and we would converse after class. He grasped aspects of my being, regarding my desires. Save the elaborate tales of your charm and allure." Thomas interrupted her, his disdain clear in every syllable. "I want his full name. Now." "Andrew Mitchell." Charlotte wiped her tears with shaking hands, smearing her mascara further. "He teaches the advanced classes." Thomas's jaw clenched. "What happened that night? And don't lie to me." "Not anymore." Charlotte hesitated, her breath hitching. We tried something new. He urged me to." Her voice cracked. "When it went wrong, he left me there, alone." "Of course he did." Thomas stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the linoleum floor. The sound made Charlotte flinch. That's what happens when you let someone use you like a cheap toy. That's not fair. Charlotte's voice rose with desperation, cracking on the last word. I made a mistake. Yes, but a mistake. Thomas's laugh was hollow, echoing off the sterile walls. A mistake is forgetting to pick up milk. A mistake is missing the deadline. What you did was make a choice. Every time you lied about where you were going. Every time you met him. Every time you let him touch you. Those were choices, Charlotte. Deliberate, conscious choices to destroy our marriage. A nurse appeared in the doorway, drawn by their raised voices. Is everything all right in here? Fine. Thomas snapped, not taking his eyes off Charlotte. Just having a conversation with my wife about her extracurricular activities. The nurse hesitated, looking between them before reluctantly withdrawing. Her footsteps echoed down the hallway, leaving them alone with the weight of their crumbling marriage. Thomas pulled out his phone, holding it up like evidence in a trial. Where's your phone, Charlotte? Her eyes widened, panic replacing the tears. What? Your phone? The one you're always guarding like it contains state secrets. The one you never leave unattended. Where is it? I think the police have it. Charlotte's voice was small, defeated. They took my belongings when the ambulance brought me in. Thomas was already striding toward the door, his purpose clear. In the hallway, he found Officer Parker talking with the nurse at the station. The young officer straightened as Thomas approached, clearly reading the intent in his expression. I need my wife's phone, Thomas said without preamble. It's evidence of her affair with Andrew Mitchell. Parker's eyebrows rose at the name. She identified him. Yes, he's an instructor at Radiance Yoga. I want to see every message, every photo, every piece of evidence of their relationship. Mr. Crawford. Parker's tone was professional but cautious. The phone is currently logged as evidence in an ongoing investigation. An investigation into what? A consensual affair gone wrong. Thomas's voice was sharp. Or are you actually going to charge him with abandoning her there? Parker studied him for a long moment before nodding slightly. Follow me. They walked in tense silence to a small office where evidence was being processed. Parker retrieved a clear plastic bag containing Charlotte's belongings. Her purse, clothing, and the phone with its cracked screen. The passcode, Thomas demanded, taking the phone. 8 to 24. Charlotte's weak voice came from the doorway. She stood there in her hospital gown, clutching an IV pole for support. Her face was pale, dark circles under her eyes, making her look ghostly in the fluorescent lighting. It's your birthday. The irony of her using his birthday as her passcode while betraying him made Thomas's jaw clench so hard he could hear his teeth grind. He entered the numbers, and the phone unlocked to reveal a messaging app open to a conversation with him. What he found made bile rise in his throat. Months of messages, each one a new betrayal. Miss you already. Can't wait until Thursday's book club meeting. Last night was amazing. I love how you make me feel so free. Your husband's really working late again. His loss is my gain. Pictures followed, each one driving the knife deeper. Charlotte in lingerie he'd never seen. Intimate photos clearly meant for Andrew's eyes. Selfies of them together, both glowing with satisfaction. But the worst were the messages mocking him. Thomas's hands shook with rage as he scrolled through month after month of betrayal. I'm taking screenshots of everything, he told Officer Parker, his voice tight with controlled fury. I want it all documented for my lawyer. Of course. Parker's tone was carefully neutral. Thomas nodded curtly and pulled out his own phone, dialing a number he'd hoped never to need. Jim, it's Thomas Crawford. I need you to draw up divorce papers. Immediately, Charlotte sobbed from the doorway, her frail form trembling against the IV pole. Divorce? She whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of hospital machinery. Thomas, please. We can work through this. I'll go to counseling. I'll do anything you want. Please, don't throw away 8 years of marriage. I didn't throw it away. Thomas's voice was razor sharp as he turned to face her. You did, with every lie, every secret meeting, every time you chose him over me. It wasn't like that. Charlotte's voice cracked as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. What Andrew and I had. It wasn't real. It was just physical. You're my husband. I love you. Love. Thomas spat the word like poison. Is that what you call it? Letting another man touch you? Laughing with him about deceiving me? sharing intimate details of our marriage with a stranger. I'm sorry, Charlotte sobbed, her legs trembling beneath her hospital gown. I'm so sorry. Please, Thomas, give me another chance. We can fix this. We can go to marriage counseling. Start over. Start over. Thomas's laugh was bitter. And what will we build it on? Charlotte, more lies, more deception. The foundation of our marriage is gone. You destroyed it, piece by piece. Every time you met him in that motel room. It was a mistake, she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. The biggest mistake of my life. I'll never see him again. I promise. I'll quit yoga. Change my number. Anything you want. What I want. Thomas stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. What I want is my wife back. The woman I trusted completely. The woman I would have died for. But she's gone, isn't she? If she ever existed at all. Charlotte swayed on her feet, the color draining from her face. A nurse rushed forward to steady her, shooting Thomas a disapproving look. She needs to rest, the nurse said firmly. This conversation can wait. No, it can't. Thomas straightened his jacket, his expression cold. Because there is no more conversation to have. All communication goes through my lawyer from now on. He turned to Officer Parker. I trust you'll get my wife's statement about her encounter with Mr. Mitchell. Parker nodded, his professional mask firmly in place. We'll be conducting a full investigation into the incident. Good. Thomas's voice was clipped. Send any relevant documentation to my lawyer's office. Jim Davidson at Davidson & Associates. He'll be handling everything from here on out. Thomas, please. Charlotte's voice was barely a whisper now. Don't leave like this. Don't let it end this way. He paused in the doorway, not turning to look at her. You ended it, Charlotte. Every time you walked into that motel room. Every time you lied to my face. Every time you let him touch you. This is just making it official. The sound of her collapse behind him. The nurses rushing to help. The monitors beeping in alarm. None of it made him turn back. The woman he loved was already gone, replaced by a stranger who had betrayed him in the worst possible way. There would be no forgiveness, no reconciliation, no second chances. As he stepped into the elevator, Charlotte's broken sobs echoed down the hallway. He let the doors close between them. As final as the death of their marriage, morning sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Davidson & Associates, casting long shadows across the mahogany conference table where Thomas sat reviewing the final divorce settlement. The thick stack of papers before him represented the death of his marriage, each page outlining the precise terms of its dissolution. Jim Davidson, his attorney, sat across from him, radiating satisfaction as he adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses. The morning light caught the silver in his temples, highlighting the experience etched in the lines around his eyes. He'd earned every one of those lines fighting battles like this. I must confess, Thomas, Jim began, his tone infused with a sense of accomplishment. This stands out as one of the most decisive wins I've witnessed in 2 decades of practicing divorce law. The infidelity clause in your agreement was unassailable, and the evidence we collected was indisputable. Thomas's fingers glided along the edge of the settlement papers. Explain it to me clearly. Jim, I desire to know every nuance. Of course. Jim pulled out a summary sheet, his Mont Blanc pen tapping each point as he explained. First, the house. It's yours, free and clear. Charlotte's name has been removed from the deed. The same goes for both vehicles and all investment accounts. What about her claim to my law firm shares? Denied completely. The judge was particularly unsympathetic. Given the circumstances, Jim shuffled through more papers. She keeps only what she brought into the marriage. Her personal effects, her pre-marriage savings, and her car. Everything acquired during the marriage goes to you. As per the print-up's infidelity clause. Thomas nodded, his expression remaining carefully neutral. And the medical bills. Her responsibility entirely. The judge actually cited her reckless behavior as justification for not requiring you to contribute. Jim allowed himself a small smile. The hospital incident really worked in our favor. A knock at the door interrupted them. Patricia, Jim's longtime secretary, entered carrying a thick manila envelope. The final divorce decree just arrived from Judge Henderson's office, she announced, placing it carefully on the table. And Mr. Crawford, there's a detective here to see you about the Mitchell case. Thomas exchanged glances with Jim, who nodded. Sent him in. Patricia. Detective Marcus Reed entered, his weathered face bearing the tired expression of someone who'd seen too much of humanity's darker side. He carried a leather portfolio under one arm and declined the offered seat with a shake of his head. Mr. Crawford, Mr. Davidson. He acknowledged them both. I wanted to deliver this update in person. Andrew Mitchell accepted a plea deal this morning. Thomas's hands flattened against the table. What are the terms? 3 years with possibility of parole after 18 months. Mandatory counseling. And registration as a sex offender. Reed pulled out some paperwork. The DA pushed hard after we uncovered similar complaints from other students at the yoga studio. Other complaints. Thomas's voice carried a dangerous edge. Reed nodded grimly. 3 other women came forward after your wife's case went public. All with similar stories. Mitchell using his position as an instructor to initiate relationships. Pushing boundaries. Engaging in increasingly risky behavior. In the studio. Jim interjected, shuddering. Shuddered as of yesterday. Their insurance dropped them when the pattern of incidents came to light. Reed's expression hardened. Mitchell won't be teaching yoga to anyone for a very long time. Thomas absorbed this information, his jaw working silently. What about Charlotte's statement? Did she cooperate? Fully. Reed confirmed. Her testimony was crucial to the plea deal. She provided detailed accounts of how Mitchell gradually escalated their encounters, pressured her into more extreme acts, then abandoned her when things went wrong that night. A muscle twitched in Thomas's cheek. Did she mention how willing she was? How she laughed with him about deceiving me? Mr. Crawford. Reed's tone was professional but sympathetic. I understand your anger. But your wife was also a victim of Mitchell's manipulation. Ex-wife. Thomas corrected coldly. As of today, she's my ex-wife. Reed nodded in acknowledgement. Of course. Well, that's all I needed to share. The DA's office will send formal documentation for your records. After the detective left, Thomas stared at the divorce decree. Its gold seal gleamed in the morning light. 8 years of marriage reduced to legal terminology and property divisions. Jim hesitated. Charlotte's lawyer contacted me this morning. She's in serious financial difficulty. Thomas's expression didn't change. Explain. The medical bills alone are over $50. Then there's her legal fees. Lost wages from the yoga studio closure. Jim spread his hands. She's facing bankruptcy. Not my concern. Jim nodded. No, it's not. Thomas glanced at his phone. A text from an unknown number. Andrew Mitchell, I'm heading to jail tomorrow. I know you hate me. But please look after Charlotte. What happened wasn't all her fault. Thomas blocked the number without responding. Let them deal with their guilt and regrets. He was done with both of them. The drive home took him past the yoga studio where it had all started. The windows were dark now. A for lease sign hanging prominently in the front. Another casualty of choices and consequences. His new apartment building rose ahead. All glass, steel, and modernity. No memories haunted these halls. No ghosts of betrayal lurked in the corners. The doorman nodded as Thomas entered, taking the private elevator to the penthouse level. Inside, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. Thomas poured himself a scotch and watched the sun setting over the urban landscape. On his finger, the tan line where his wedding ring had been was finally fading. His phone buzzed again. An email from Jim. Final paperwork filed. Charlotte's lawyer says she's moving to Seattle next week. Clean break. Fresh start for everyone. Thomas deleted the email without reply. Seattle might as well be another planet. Distance wouldn't change what had happened. Wouldn't erase the betrayal that had reshaped him. The city lights began to twinkle on as darkness fell. Thomas raised his glass in a silent toast to lessons learned. And bridges burned. The man he'd been had died in that hospital room, watching surgeons extract the physical evidence of his wife's infidelity. The man who emerged was stronger for the pain, wiser for the betrayal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new beginnings. But tonight, Thomas stood alone in his fortress of glass and steel, finally free of the weight of love and trust and all the wounds they'd brought with them. Let Charlotte and Andrew carry the burden of their guilt. Let them face the consequences of their choices. Thomas Crawford had emerged from the ashes of his marriage transformed. Not bitter, but harder. Not broken, but reinvented. The city spread out before him like a field of stars, full of possibilities. For the first time since that late-night phone call had shattered his world, Thomas felt truly, completely free. Thanks to everyone who took the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking and subscribing if you haven't already. Feel free to share your thoughts on the events in the comments below. Take care.